what my show is about, and I can very clearly articulate it to anybody. And because I know exactly what my guests, who my listeners are, it's easier for my guests to recommend people and for listeners to recommend people to my show.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Welcome back to the podcast on podcasting. And as per usual, on the odd days, I get to have some as a guest on the show. And that's going to be today. Today's an odd number episode. And on the even numbered episode, it's just you and me. It's just me pouring into your business, sharing tips, tricks, and strategies that I'm learning along the way that I think can kind of get you to that next level by either launching your show, growing your show, or monetizing your show. Today, I've got Rob Cook on the podcast, and he's a certified financial planner. He's got the podcast called Contenders Wanted. We're going to talk a little bit about his story, what he's learned throughout the ages. I think as we're recording, if I do remember correctly, you have like 60-ish episodes out right now, Rob?
I have about 30 episodes.
30.
Yeah.
I doubled it.
Yeah,
Oops.
It's all right.
Maybe by the time this podcast episode launches, maybe there will be 60.
Yeah, maybe.
We technically have over 10 months of content recorded. So before we get started into the interview, I'll just mention that some people are like, that's nuts. But on the other hand, there's always being behind the eight ball, always like procrastinating, saying, oh shit, tomorrow I have an episode due. I haven't started. I'm going to need 10 hours of editing. And that's a stressful way to live. So I'd rather have plenty of content.
In fact, myself on my show, I have 6 months worth of content already created and ready to go. And in fact, before I even started this newest season of Contenders Wanted, I had like 8 months of content, and I already had 5 episodes already edited. So all I had to do was show notes and some of the cleanup stuff at the very end.
That's awesome. I'm glad you said that. Because I think that one of the reasons that a lot of podcasters quit is because it feels stressful for them because they're always kind of behind the eight ball. They're always trying to play catch up, having those oh shit moments. But you, on the other hand, you're months ahead of the game. And it's like easy breezy, and the podcast probably isn't stressful. Let's jump into your story. Your bio itself is already in the show notes. I always do that for our listeners so that if they want to read it, they just scroll down. It's simple, and we don't have to read anything. But let's jump into here. Who in your business do you serve, and how do you serve them? The reason I ask this is because most of my listeners, most of my clients are trying to make money with their podcast, and sometimes it fits and sometimes it doesn't. So go ahead, Rob.
Yeah. So as you mentioned before, I am a certified financial planner, and I'm also a CPA, certified public accountant. And by day, I actually work as a wealth advisor. So that's really my business. My podcast is my passion project that's kind of linked to it. I don't use it for business development necessarily. I'm not trying to necessarily monetize it. If I get to the point where I can, that'd be fantastic. But for now, I do it because I love it. And I've purposely done that because in my mind's eye, if I'm doing it just to make the money, well, then I'll probably burn out a little sooner. Because as you're probably very well aware, Adam, podcasting is a long-term play. You can't just get in there and expect to be making money right off the bat. That's just not the way it works. You have to build audience. You have to build rapport. It takes time and effort. And for some people, it might be too much time and too much effort to really get to the point where you can start to effectively monetize it. So I serve individuals and families who want to create meaningful lives, who look at their wealth beyond just, I'm getting a return and I want to make as much money as possible. I grew up in a family where money was a tool. It was a tool used to bless the family and to bless the lives of other people. And I try to take that same philosophy and apply it to what I do by day, serving predominantly business owners and real estate investors. Those are kind of my two niches within our office. But my podcast is kind of connected in the fact that the tagline of our show is meaningful success without sacrificing what's most important in life. Because I feel like if you look in the media and you look around social media for sure, there's a lot of loud voices of people who went all in, which is great, but they sacrifice a lot of the things that make life, in my opinion, really worth living on the pursuit of that journey, or they became successful long before they ever realized how important those other things were. And then they look back and go, oh yeah, by the way, those things are important. You should be making sure that you keep that good balance. And it's like, well, yeah, that's easy for you to say now, you know? And so I try and share the stories of people who've had great success in some significant way, whether that's CEOs, professional athletes, world-class coaches, professors in academia who can teach principles of success. And we try and help people move themselves from being a contender to a champion in their own life through the stories of those who come on and the tools and strategies and tactics and habits and mindset changes that these individuals have gone through, so our listeners can then apply it in their life and become better.
That's really, really powerful, and something that I certainly failed at or went through worrying a lot more about business success. I think it's funny because when I grew up, when I was really, really young, I always thought that I'd be like the greatest dad. And I never really thought too much about my business. I thought I'd be making money. I thought I'd be doing well for myself. I'd be able to support the family. I might even be driving a Ferrari. But really what I thought was most important was just my children. I thought I want to be the best at ever. And I actually sacrificed that in order to build the business. And I was unhappy in both places. The business was doing okay, pretty well, but I was not being present enough with the kids, and I was getting stressed. And definitely my priorities were not aligned. And your podcast, Contenders Wanted, really seems to reach out to that person. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking to yourself, how do I make sure that I can have both? I can have meaningful success in all things, including my family or my personal life, my health, staying fit, eating right, not drinking too much, for example. And some of these things are lessons that I learned the hard way. And I'm glad that you started a podcast like that, Contenders Wanted, something that supports people that want to achieve meaningful success. I want to dive into your podcast and share a little bit about like what challenges that you had to overcome as you were just launching your podcast.
Of course. So the first thing I'll admit is that I have been listening to podcasts for over 10 years, long before they were ever popular. And people have told me for years, Rob, you have a great radio voice. You should do a radio show, or you should do a podcast. And I thought, yeah, that would be fun. But I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what my topic is going to be. And I was just stuck for years in that loop of, I don't know what my topic is. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I'm just not going to do it. And looking back, there were plenty of things I could have done a show on. Plenty of areas of expertise. Heck, I could have done a finance-related one, or in school, or talk about career change and things, specifically, because of various stories from my life. But I was stuck in that mental loop of, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know. I just won't move forward at all, right? I could have done any number of things to get in the game many years before. But what wound up happening is it took the COVID pandemic to really get me thinking about it. So I've really only been going for about a year, a little over a year at this point, a year and a couple months. But one of my biggest challenges was just getting over that mental hurdle of thinking I didn't have anything to offer. And I think that's a pretty common thing for a lot of people in a lot of different areas, not even necessarily just podcasting. I think it's common for us to think that we undercut our value to other people or the blessing that we can be to others just because of the stories that we have or because of the passions that we have. And podcasting, luckily, it was something that I finally just said, forget it, I'm going to do it, and put myself in a corner to figure it out. And then Contenders Wanted was born. And I'll be the first to admit, I launched my show thinking that I was launching and doing great. And then I got into a group on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's the main social media platform that I use. And on LinkedIn, there was a group of us that were all starting to kind of launch podcasts all about the same time. A buddy of mine invited me into the group. And I thought, oh, this will be fantastic. There'll be other great guys. We can help cross-promote and we can learn best practices. And it has been that, and that's been great. But it also gave me a window into seeing how other people were launching their shows. And I very quickly realized that I had taken the shoot first, aim second approach. For example, there was a guy in the group who had 50 episodes when he was starting, because he was going to kind of do a bi-weekly show, and he wanted to have almost a year's worth of episodes. And so he had 50 recorded before he even hit the play button, and he was releasing one a day for the first month, and then he was going to, it was just craziness. They had full websites built. They had a full technology stack. They had lead magnets and landing pages and all this sort of stuff. Full of them, and spent a few $1,000s on different courses. And in my ignorance, I thought that, well, I'll just record 5 or 6 episodes. I'll start releasing one a week and then adjust as time goes on. It's all about just consistency, and long term, I'll be fine. In hindsight, oh my goodness, I felt so inadequate as soon as I got into that group and realized what was going on in all those other groups, and just really how I perceived myself as being so far behind at that time. I've since learned that there are certain things you should do, and even certain things you don't necessarily have to do.
What would you say on those? What things should you do and not necessarily have to do?
Well, I think the first thing that you need to do is just see if podcasting is a good thing for you. I've heard Tim Ferris say you need to set like a minimum number of episodes that you're going to do, and then just reassess at that point. So some of these guys had recorded, say, like 50 episodes, and they had all these things, but then a couple of them aren't even recording anymore, and it's a year later. For some people, you might love listening to podcasts, but the process of going through and creating a show is very different. It takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, some expertise. It takes some coordinating. It takes hunting down guests if you're an interview style show. I mean, it takes a lot of time to write out what you're going to say if you're the solo type of podcaster. It takes time and energy and effort. And some people, they love the idea of doing a podcast. They don't necessarily love podcasting. And so I've learned that perhaps somewhere between where I was and where all these other guys were in this group is probably a happy medium, right? I probably should have done a little extra effort up front to maybe get a little bit better technology stack, or maybe have a little bit better plan other than just, here's my theme and I'm just going to go interview people that I think fit the theme.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that was definitely one thing that I definitely realized is you got to make sure that it works for you.
I want to ask about the consistency that you mentioned. You said something like, you started your podcast, consistency was important. It's definitely important for other people. You currently have like 8 months of content, 6 to 8 months of content already recorded. So my question is, and it's coming from, you mentioned that you had started about a year and a half ago, but you have published about 30 episodes. And one of the more recent ones was episode 28 with a professional athlete. So I've got a question on that here coming up in a moment. But really what I'm wanting to understand is, what does consistency mean to you? Is it weekly? Is it bi-weekly? Because like 30 weeks is less than a year, for example. And so did you have challenges keeping it consistent, or is your consistency more like every other week? If you don't mind sharing a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So for me, knowing that I was going into this as a hobbyist, I, like John Lee Dumas's Entrepreneurs on Fire every single day, there was no way I was going to be able to do that, period. Not even possible. So for me, I am into the show trying to think, okay, what is a cadence that if I had to do this for 10 years, that I could maintain, no matter what happens in life? And for me, that meant every other week. I looked at all the shows that I had been listening to over the previous decade, and I noticed that the shows that I truly loved that eventually became something had hundreds of episodes, and most of them didn't have daily shows. And so I realized I could give myself permission to do a bi-weekly show, because there were other successful podcasts out there that were doing that. If that worked for me, if that was going to make it possible so that podcasting was enjoyable and not just listening to podcasts, like I was kind of hearkening back to in the beginning there, that was the cadence that I was going to do. So I recorded 5 or 6 episodes, and I actually released 1 episode a week for the first 10 weeks of my show, just so that I could have, a decent amount of episodes out there. And then from that point on, I've just published every other week. And I've also chosen to specifically do seasons, because once again, my show is about balance. My show is about meaningful success. And so it would be a bit hypocritical if I was constantly pushing myself, constantly trying to force stuff out at the expense of my family and others around me. If you actually go back and look at the dates of my shows, I start in August, I end in June. I take a natural summer vacation, In part, it's for me to be able to get some things done that I wouldn't necessarily have time to do during the regular season. It's to kind of get ahead on recordings and all sorts of things like that, to build out landing pages, to do those other things that are part of the infrastructure of having a great show that as a hobbyist, sometimes I just don't have time for because I am a dad. I do have a job. I have a church obligation. I want to spend time with friends. I want to live a normal life, do the things that I'm trying to encourage other people to do. Yeah. So for me, consistency is continuing, having a season, doing something in which I know that I could do for 10 years. And for me, that means I'm going to publish every other week, August through June, every single year.
Yeah. So I want to get some free advice from you, and you won't know this because I'm interviewing you on the podcast. So my listener will know that I'm just getting free advice from you. Out of curiosity, I feel like my life is pretty well balanced for the most part. Okay. With my kids now, wasn't always like that. I try to spend time with them. I take them out every weekend to do something fun. In the evenings, I try to do my best to spend time with them. I do date nights with my sweetheart every Monday. Here's what I'm definitely missing. It's friends. You mentioned friends, and my heart started like being like, oh, that would be cool. But then I start saying like, how would I even add that? How would I even like add that to the other things that I'm doing? So in part, I'm curious if I need to be doing less work or spend less time with my kids or podcast less or whatever the case might be. But I think it would be cool to hang out with friends, which is something like it's either a double date. My sweetheart's there and we were already doing a date and then our friends happen to be there, or I almost never do it. I might go biking with a friend like, hey, do you want to go mountain biking on Tuesday or whatever? But since you're really the expert in it, your podcast is about it, and you care about it so much that you actually are saying no to good things so that you can maintain the healthy things and be more credible, I guess, or like practicing what you preach.
Try not to be a hypocrite, that's for sure.
Hypocritical. That's really what I was going for, but I think I lost the word. If I want to be more of a friend, I don't really spend enough time even thinking about it. But I will say, when you mentioned that you spend time with your friends and you want to have a normal life, I was like, man, I think I'm missing that. So tell me, how can I be better at that?
Well, I should start with a disclaimer. Disclaimer is I'm not perfect at this by any means. But I did have a couple thoughts that came to mind. For me, well, the first thing that actually came to mind is that this is pretty normal for most men. Actually, studies have shown that men, once you reach that point in life where you're married and you're raising a family and you are working, friendships just die off. And because of that, it does take a lot of extra effort and energy to maintain them or to, heaven forbid, want to grow them or find them. I will admit my friend circle is pretty small. We're talking probably less than a dozen people in total that I would really consider friends. And some of those friends live on the other side of the country. So when I talk about maintaining friendships, sometimes it is going and doing something. Like one of my cousins is one of my best friends and he lives here in the town. I have to put a reminder on my phone every month to remind me to hang out with him. Right? Now, for some people, that might sound a little bit ridiculous. But to me, that's one way in which I am intentionally trying to live my life. It is important to me that I spend time with those that I care about, my friends, my family, and other loved ones. If I need to remind myself just because life is busy, so be it. I'm not going to let my pride hold me back from living the life that I want just because it's like, oh, well, that's only people who are too caught up in their lives would have to send a reminder for themselves. Shut up, eat your pride. Like if you need that, that's okay, but just own it, right? Yeah. And so for me, I own it. I have a reminder on my phone. When are you going to do X with so-and-so? Have you hung out with so-and-so yet this month? So I would say a couple tips is number one, be real intentional about it. If that means you got to put a reminder, okay? Like if that means that you need to have a set day every single month with that person and it's not as spontaneous as it used to be when you were 18 years old or when you were in college, so be it. But if that's what you want, then make it happen. However that is. Yeah. And that second thing, like I said at the beginning, is just recognize that this is pretty normal. Don't beat yourself up. perhaps kind of going along with this idea of being intentional, another thing I might suggest is be specific about who it is that you want to hang out with. Ed Milet talks about the idea that we are all thermostats and we will adjust ourselves to the thermostat, to the others around us.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't need to hang out with that buddy that's still going to the bars every single weekend and going not really anywhere in his life. Maybe even if you've been friends since you were teenagers, maybe it's time to level up your life, increase the thermostat and temperature, and maybe purposely, you can stay in touch with them, have a phone call every once in a while, but maybe you don't need to spend as much time with them. Choose who you want to spend your time with so you can level up your life, so you can have greater levels of happiness and fulfillment that we're all honestly searching for.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like I've got some homework to do after this episode, but let's jump in. We've got tons of questions. I was wondering about you finding great guests, and I want to make this a two-part question.
Okay.
Really, for starters, who is a good guest? Does it have to be somebody famous? Does it have to be a professional athlete, an author, ultra successful person, or famous person? What makes a good guest? And the second part is, how do you get those good guests? Because I know a lot of people that come to our company to support them with growing their podcast. A big thing that seems like most of them ask is always, how do I find better guests? How do I find more guests? Hey, I'm running out of guests. Can you put me in touch with anybody? And I feel like not only is it just my clients and people that come to us for help, but I believe that it's probably most podcasters struggle with finding good guests. So, Rob, what's a good guest and how do you get them?
Great questions. I'm just writing down some thoughts I had here as you're asking these questions. So the very first question, what makes a good guest? For me, determining what makes a good guest really goes back to having a very clear idea about what my show is about. One thing I think makes it hard to find guests is kind of an old marketing saying. If you're marketing to everyone, you're marketing to no one, right? And that's the same as it comes to finding a podcasting guest. If any guest will work, you're not going to find any good guests, right? Type of thing. So if you know what you're looking for, and you can be very clear about that, like I want people who have had meaningful success without sacrificing what's most important. That might still sound pretty general, but there might only be very specific type of people that come to your mind who that fits.
Is it okay if I interrupt?
Yeah, go for it.
Like, my real question is wondering if I could even be a guest on your show. Now, here's the reason why I asked. Maybe now I'm doing a lot better at not sacrificing some of those things.
Yeah.
But since in the past, I absolutely was sacrificing my health, drinking too much alcohol, not working out hardly at all. And this was like a spiral effect because I wasn't exercising and because I was drinking too much. I was more cranky than I probably needed to be. I wasn't sleeping very well. I also didn't want to exercise the next day. And then I was like, kids, get out of my face. I got to get some work done so I can make money so that I can eventually blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
So who is your guest? Is your guest somebody who's never made that mistake? Or is it somebody who has definitely learned through those mistakes? Just out of curiosity, which
Great
one
question.
is it?
Well, I think first and foremost, no one goes through life without having made some version of that mistake, right? If you have a reason for living that way, it's likely because you screwed up at some point in the past. So I would say the vast majority of my guests would be like you, Adam, who in some way maybe had success in some way, but then realized that they were sacrificing things along the way and decided to reverse course. Or the guests you get less often are those that are far more intentional about that and choose not to go that route. I also like to get guests that I call them bringing on fellow contenders, people who are in the slog, who are going to share lessons in the trenches of like, okay, this is what I'm doing right now. I'm trying to do better. This is my story up to this point. This is what I'm doing. I've had a couple of episodes like that as well. So I don't necessarily just say, oh, well, you're not successful enough or you haven't had a perfect life, so therefore you can't come on my show. I mean, like that would be ridiculous. So yes, a great possible guest for the show because you at least have come to recognize that there is a need for that balance. There are some people who never recognize that until it's far too late. And sometimes those stories need to be told. But at the same time, let's try and find a better balance right now, if we can.
Yeah. So for starters, what I got from you is when determining who is a good guest, first have to look at your purpose. Like, what is the reason that the show is happening? And if you go there first, you can start actually identifying who would be a good guest, what stories would be helpful for your listener, because you know what you're trying to achieve. Yeah. And I think a lot of people miss that. And they do the thing that you mentioned earlier about marketers. If you're marketing to everybody, if you're trying to speak the language of the whole world at the same time, if you're trying to please everybody and make sure that you have a vanilla show or whatever that wasn't going to offend anyone, wasn't going to push anyone out, it also at the same time doesn't really attract anyone in particular. Nobody is thinking to themselves, ooh, that show's for me. That show's for someone like me going through what I'm going through. And so your first step was being more intentional of at least knowing what the purpose of the show is. And then you can start finding guests that serve that purpose.
Yeah. And
now wondering, how do we end up like approaching that guest? Yeah. Like regardless if it's an author, professional athlete, what is the way that you found best to get those people to say, yes, I would like to be part of your show?
Great question. And I'll say that it has evolved over time. When I first started the show, it was just purely my network. My first 5 episodes were just people who I personally knew, who I thought fit the profile of what I wanted in guests and who listeners would find interesting to talk to. That was actually the piece that kind of goes back to, what makes a good guest? The second piece is thinking about who is my listener and what do they want to hear, right? The first part is being very clear on what makes my show uniquely different. But the second part is who distinctly is my listener and how can I provide them specific value? So whenever I'm thinking of guests, I'm thinking of number 1, the purpose of my show, and number 2, the quote, ideal client avatar, or whatever phrase you want to use, my ideal listener, who are they and how can I speak to them through this guest, right? So then how I find them, I found, like I said, at the beginning it was just purely network, but over time it has grown into a couple of different things. Because I have clarity on what my show is about and I can very clearly articulate it to anybody, and because I know exactly what my guests, who my listeners are, it's easier for my guests to recommend people and for listeners to recommend people to my show. So most of the people that I have nowadays, I'll admit, come from just recommendations of my interactions with people. I talk about my show constantly with people because I just love it. It's my passion project. I have fun with it. So everyone that I come in contact with, as soon as I tell them, it's meaningful success without sacrificing what's most important. People who have tried to keep some sort of balance in their life, who have had great success in some area of their life, be it business, be it health, be it relationships, whatever. And as soon as I say that, people go, you know what? You should talk to so-and-so. This is their story. And they give me a little piece of their story and I go, wow, that's really cool. Because I have clarity on what my show is about and what my listener wants to hear, I can immediately filter if that person who they're recommending might be a good opportunity. And it also makes it easier for them to recommend someone to me. Then once they recommend somebody, if sometimes I'll ask for email introduction, sometimes if we're at an event, they'll introduce me to the person, whatever it might be. I mean, now, if it might be an event, but during COVID, that was definitely not the case. It was always an email introduction or a phone call. But I would say just talk about your show, talk about it, have clarity on those two things. It makes it easier for people to recommend people to you. It also makes it easier for you to then intentionally network with individuals. Another tip I'd say, how do I get them on the show? I start early before I make the ask. And this is kind of a principle that I got actually from Russell Brunson, which is dig your well before you need the water, is the phrase that he uses. And it's this idea that, there's some people on my show, like I have a running list on Trello. Trello is my app that I use for all of my workflow, for all of my podcast stuff. And on my workflow, I have the guests that I have currently done, all the shows I've already recorded, those that are kind of in the pre-recording phase. We're sending stuff to them. I have the initial preparations phase. And then I have my I would love to have these people kind of guests out there. And I've connected with all of those people on social media and I'm digging the well already with them. Like, hey, who knows? Like Ed Milet, I'm just throwing this out there. I want you on my show one day, just so you know. There's a reason why I comment on every single one of your posts almost every day on LinkedIn, right? Like,
awesome.
I'm doing things to try and build rapport and build relationships with these people long before I approach them and go, hey, I want you on my show. And sometimes it might only be a few interactions. Like, for example, Anthony Trucks was on my show. Great guy, former pro athlete turned inspirational and motivational speaker. And we got connected on LinkedIn. we just had a conversation kind of back and forth. I realized very quickly this guy would be a great fit for my show. What the heck? I just went for it. And I just asked him, hey, would you be on my show? And this is a guy that's in the same circles as a Russell Brunson and a Dean Graziosi and Brendon Burchards and all these big names. At this point, I wouldn't even think could possibly get on my show. And he was like, yeah, sure. What the heck? I'll come on your show. He even told me when we were recording, his secretary said, why are you going on this guy's show? And he's like, I don't know. I just like the guy. And I decided I was going to do it. But it took me having a conversation with him, building some rapport first before I just went for it. But even then, I mean, we had a few weeks worth of conversations back and forth before I asked. And that was a pretty quick ask, honestly, for me. So
it sounds like you are hunting and you're gathering for your podcast guests. Not only are you setting up traps and getting prepared and going for the kill, but you're additionally creating some type of system where you're always talking about it. It's front of mind, it's top of mind. And people are like, here's some carrots, or here's a guy that needs to be interviewed on your podcast. So you're being able to get it in both places. And I think that's really helped you a ton. I quoted you 4 or 5 times. Number one, we're going to make sure that my team puts Trello in the show notes. Trello is an awesome way to manage, kind of like a CRM, to manage projects, to manage clients, to be able to say, this is what phase they're in, what's next. You just easily drag it over. So we'll put that link into the show notes. The other things is you just talk about your show all the time. It's almost like shameless self-promotion, but really it's like you care about this passion project. And so it naturally is coming out of your mouth in different situations. I tell everyone about my podcast. You said meaningful success without sacrificing your life. Or what I love about this saying is you've created a tagline. Actually, I personally wish that the tagline was on your podcast artwork. If it was just right there and everybody was, I think that would help pull a couple of people in.
Probably.
But the thing that I think our listener needs to hear is the template for creating your tagline can be doing this good thing without this bad thing. Get this great success, get this result without this hardship. My tagline could be, well, our tagline at our company literally is the easy button for podcasters. But really what we're saying is we help you become a top 1% podcast without you having to figure all this stuff out. It's you press record, we handle all the back, and you're guaranteed to get it. And that type of communication is, wait, you're saying I can get this good thing, I can have success, but I don't have to sacrifice my family, for example, my health, for example. And so I quoted you with your tagline because I want to make sure that our listener, who is also a podcaster, that they're spending the time to craft a message. This is the big promise of my show, and you don't have to go through this to get it, whatever that is.
I think a really good exercise for your listeners that would be helpful. This is something that I did that helped me kind of come up with this tagline. Because I'll admit, my show started off as just very general success. And I had some people challenge me on this idea of what is your show really about? What makes you just different than every other possible success podcast out there? Because if you just say, oh, I just want to interview successful people, right? It doesn't have the same staying power. But I had someone challenge me and say, I want you to compress in 10 words or less the essence of your show.
Yeah.
And that was really hard to do, frankly. Because when it was just success, okay, great. Well, what does success even mean to you or to your listener, right? Okay. First I was like, oh, great success. Oh, okay. But I don't want it to be focused around money. Yeah, I do stuff with money on a daily basis, but there's so much more to life than money. And so it led down this whole rabbit hole of, okay, what is success to me? Okay, well, I clearly don't want it to be sacrificing. For me, it's faith and family, and health. And, okay, well, how do I do that in less than 10 words? So it was a great exercise, frankly, to make me go down this rabbit hole to really nail down my show.
I'm really glad, Rob, that you took a little bit of time to share your process of creating the tagline to be able to understand who it is that you're identifying. I think that was really powerful for all of us as we're creating our taglines and trying to make sure that we're succinctly able to speak to our avatar, for example. The last thing that I got quoted for you is dig your well before you need the water. When I was teaching people how to like raise passive income, passive capital for their real estate deals, one of the things that I mentioned all the time was, when is the best time to plant an apple tree? It's 20 years ago, obviously. It's 30 years ago. It's however long ago that you need for that to be a giant apple tree. Now, whenever you need an apple, you got millions. You got so many extra apples, they're falling on the ground. Mm-hmm. And so it's the same concept. It's put in the work now, start those relationships now, because when you need them, you're able to just reach over to that well or that apple tree and grab that water or that fruit. And you don't have to worry about like, oh crap, I need to have a well. I need some water. We're out. What do I do? Okay, I'm going to spend the next 10 days digging this well, making sure I can find water. And you run out of water literally while you're digging that well. And it just doesn't seem like an area that any of us should be in. So just powerful. And you talked about it with regard to finding great guests. For example, the one gentleman that you were talking about, you started connecting with him and then you were like, hey, why don't you come on the show? Mm-hmm. And it worked out. And I thought that was a really good story.
I would like to also just maybe add a little piece to that. Kind of digging your well goes beyond just interacting before. I think it's through the whole process on the show. So for example, one of the things I've been very intentional about is that I try to make the process as seamless, more or less, as seamlessly easy for all of my guests. And I want them to very clearly know that when they sit down with me, I have done a ton of research and I know them. I don't want them to sit down and be like, this is just some other podcast who's going to sit down and ask me a bunch of questions and hopefully this goes okay. No, I send them 8 to 10 questions a couple of days before that shows them, hey, by the way, I did my research, because I do at a minimum 4 to 5 hours of research on every single guest before they come. And then if they're like a big name with lots of content out there, I might do 10 to 15 plus hours of research on them. It's part of my brand, such that I want my guests to also then feel comfortable at the end of this whole thing, go, man, that was really enjoyable. I really liked sitting down and chatting with Rob. I really appreciated the fact that he read my book, or that he read through my blog, or he watched some of my YouTube videos, or whatever it might be. This guy actually like did his homework, so that I could then even ask my guests, hey, who would you recommend in your network? And they'll go, oh yeah, no, here's so-and-so. They'd probably be great. Or so-and-so, they'd be great. I mean, I had a guest I just recently interviewed. He came to me a couple days later and was like, hey, by the way, so-and-so and so-and-so, I think they might be great guests for your show. Hey, thanks so much. I really appreciate that. Now, I did some research on these people, and I'm not sure if they'll be great guests, but to me, that just shows that I'm doing what I should be doing. I'm trying to provide a good experience. I'm continuing to dig that well, even when they're in my process. I'm continuing to show up, have a good brand, have a good presence, however you want to describe it. But the point is that I'm continuing to build those relationships even as we're sitting here. It's not just, hey, gimme, and please come on my show.
Yeah. Very interesting. I will mention that I don't spend that amount of time. I want to find people that like have podcasts where we can get into their journey. And I've always been really comfortable learning along the way. The only reason I share it with our listeners, just to let them know that there's two sides to that. And I know if I had more time and wanted to spend more energy, or for example, I'm actually doing like 8 interviews per week. And I think you're publishing like lot less. And so, if I spent 4 or 5 hours per person, that would be a full-time job. Already, that would be a full-time job just on pulling that together. So there's certainly two sides to it.
Of course. See, but I know for my show, that's part of what makes my show unique, is that I'll know the whole story and I'll pick out the 2 or 3 things that really we need to focus on. I can then, quickly create a narrative that we can kind of get through the rest of this, not get through the rest of the story, but you understand what I'm trying to say here. Yeah. Right? Like, because I do that research, I do my show a certain way. And, and that's okay. For some people, you need a ton of preparation to really have a really great show. Some people like Larry King, actually. Larry King was notorious for just getting in there and sitting down and having a conversation with someone, never done any research on the people who came on his radio show and eventual TV show. But he wanted to approach it from the perspective of, I am someone who's just getting to know you just like my listener. He was intentional about that. And that's okay. If that's your intention, that's great. But I wanted to approach this show like, hey, listeners, this is a person who I have put in the time and effort to really figure out for you, so that you know that this conversation that we're going to have is going to be very valuable, because I've already done the work to figure it out for you, and we're going to get the most important things.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And I'm just grateful that you and I can have this conversation, and hopefully our listener who's a podcaster or about to be a podcaster can see both sides and just determine which route is better for them.
Yeah. You just have to be intentional about it.
100%. I like the word intentional. That's the theme of this year. I love that. We're going to take a quick break, and I've got 3 more questions, 3 of my favorite questions that I usually ask our guests. So we're going to jump into that. But first, we do have a quick break for our sponsor. We'll be right back. Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, GrowYourShow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show. Rob Cook, what podcast hacks have you learned along the way and you'd like to share with a new podcaster?
Yeah. Okay. So podcast hacks. The first one that came to mind is you need to have a process. And for most people, when you just get into podcasting, there's so much that you have to learn. There's so much that you're trying to kind of wrap your head around that it can just feel so overwhelming. I have found that my first 5 episodes or so, I was just scrambling, just trying to figure it out as I'm going along. I mean, I was still figuring out best practices for me personally and all that sort of stuff. But I realized very quickly that there was a similar process that I was going through. And then what I did is I documented that process, created a template, and then from that point forward, it became my checklist to make sure that I had hit everything. Because there are certain things that you might not do with every guest, but you want to make sure that for the applicable guests, you do those things. So having some sort of a process that you document and create a template for that I think is incredibly valuable. For me, because I'm a solo podcaster and because I do this as a hobby on the side, and because I don't want it to take forever and a day, I want to be able to spend time with my wife and my little girl and friends and family and everything else, I have to be very, very, very efficient with my time. So I have all sorts of templates that I use, technologies that I use to simplify things. So I would say, I've mentioned Tim Ferris already on the show, but I'm thinking about this because I listened to another podcast. He talked about podcasting recently. And he talked about the simple elegance of podcasting is the phrase that he used. And I really liked that because I feel like we can complicate things to the nth degree. We can have the 100-step standard operating procedure and all of these hundreds of things that we need to, quote unquote, need to be doing. But at the end of the day, simplify it as much as possible. Have a basic system, have a basic process, have some templates. Be intentional about how you want your show to come across to both the guests and to your listeners, and make it elegantly simple. As simple as possible. It'll make your life so much easier.
I don't think you could have said it any better. Document your process, create templates, but make sure that you're simplifying the process along the way. The next question that I wanted to find out is, after all the experience that you've had over a year of your podcast, what specific automation and tools have you found the most useful to make your life a little bit easier?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll admit one tool that I want, because of work issues I don't have at this point, is some sort of Calendly link. Use that for sure. You already kind of mentioned it.
What do you mean by that? You can't use it because of work?
Well, what that comes down to is I haven't found a simple way to make it work. I could create a very complicated process to make it work, but it's a pain in the butt. So instead, I choose to just book one-on-one, have conversations instead to book my episodes. But that's one tool that I would like to have, is some sort of Calendly type of thing.
Yeah.
I work in a very compliance-heavy field. Data security is incredibly important. So even just sharing my calendar with a tool like Calendly is off the table. So it would require multiple other steps to get stuff back and forth to multiple calendars all the time. And I kind of already do that, but not quite. It's just...
Rob, do you mind if I stay on this for just a moment?
Yeah, go for it.
What if you didn't worry about sharing like the calendar as much, but if you could simply block 1 hour a week or something, or 2 hours a week, for example, like Wednesday evening, you know that you're traveling less frequently than you're traveling on some of the other days. Your kids don't have soccer on Wednesdays. You don't have a church function on Wednesday evening. So like all you do is say, don't share the calendar. Don't specifically share the calendar, but you time block, let's say 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. or 4:30 and 5:30 or any other times in any other day where they can schedule these two things. And you're like, I'm always going to be ready for it on that day. And I don't have to share the calendar, but I also don't have to do the work.
I appreciate you pushing back because I think you're probably right. I should do that. I was actually thinking, in a way, I kind of already do that mentally. I block out Tuesday nights from 7:30 to 9:30 and Wednesday nights from 7:30 to 9:30 for podcasting, whether it's prepping the next episode, editing, prepping social media content, whatever it might be. Those are kind of my 2 days every single week where I can put in a couple hours each night.
So I've done like over 600 interviews with my 3 different podcasts. A little over 100 on this podcast, a little over 100 on another podcast, and then 600 on a different podcast.
Wow.
And what I've learned along the way is you can easily block out 2 times, like Tuesdays and Wednesdays or whatever. But we've worked with dozens of clients that I've poured into them. Try to stop opening up your whole damn calendar and pick like a day, a time, only one. And it's really seemed to help me and some of our clients to like even block out either Tuesday or Wednesday. Like for you, Rob, you got, hey, it's these times, these 2 times. Dude, block the one time. And if for some weird reason that person's like, I'd really love to come on Contenders Wanted, Rob, but like the only time you have is Tuesday nights, and those are off limits for me. Then you have the chance to say, oh, well, can you do Wednesday this one time? I'll make an exception because I really want to have you on the podcast.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that the listener is like, okay, maybe I will try to just do one day, one time, or 2 hours in a row on one date once a week. I think that'll help a lot of people. I'm totally cutting you off. Any tools that you've used that you want to share?
Yeah.
Besides Trello, which is already in the show notes.
Yeah, so we already talked about Trello. That was a great one. Another tool that I use that I love because I'm a hobbyist, I do all my own editing. There's a really great tool called Auphonic, Auphonic. And it's a software where you can upload your episode and it does all of the leveling, kind of the noise adjustments, puts it in WAV files, all sorts of different things that I don't have the technical expertise on how to do that. But I know it's important for the good quality sound of my show. And
say it again. Auphonic,
Auphonic, I think is what it is.
All right, we're going to find it. We'll make sure that's in the show notes as well. I have one final question,
Rob. If you only use a certain
Rob.
amount of time, it's actually free up to a certain level, which is really nice. And because I only post every other week, it's still free for me. But for someone who does 600 episodes, it's probably not going to be free. But that's okay. It's actually still pretty cheap. But for me, it's been fantastic. It's a great tool.
Any challenges you're currently facing through your podcasting journey?
I think my biggest challenges are growing. I think that's true for any podcaster. It's just how do we continue to grow? And I think the second one is making the transition from me doing everything to me having some version of a team, right? Yeah. And I think that's also true of any business owner in life, right? How do you go from the solopreneur to the business owner, right?
Yep.
So I'd say those are my 2 biggest challenges currently.
All right. So our team obviously does a lot of the marketing for people, and we do the back office stuff. What I'll share about the back office stuff is it's going to be a little bit more expensive working with a team like ours. Like it's $175 per episode. And some people that's insane expensive, and other times people are like, everybody else is way less. That is an option, but something that I think can help you and other people in who are podcasters that is not working with our team is specifically hiring a virtual assistant from the Philippines that is probably getting paid right around the $4-ish per hour mark. And Rob, one of the reasons I bring it up for you is because it sounds like you've already documented your process. You've created some templates, and that seems like the most economical way. You will still have to manage that person, but they can go part-time, especially for a show like yours. And you're only really spending, let's call it 10 hours per episode for that person to work. It's like $40, way less than like working with our team, for example. So I want to pour into you that you might want to just get a virtual assistant. And then as far as growing the podcast, one thing that I think a lot of people are not doing, they're neglecting, is they're just not marketing. It's either paid marketing or it's like, what do you got more of? Time or money? You got more money, pay for that freaking marketing, grow your show organically, or maybe that's not technically organically, but grow that show, grow that show with some fertilizer. Or if you have more time than money, I'd be more than happy to pour into you, Rob, for free, and our listener as well. Like if the listeners listening and saying, what can I do that is a free way to organically grow a podcast? Just schedule a call with me. Rob, this is open to you as well. Go to callwithadam.com, very easy website. And you can schedule a free call anytime, and I'd be more than happy to just try to give you a few of those free things that we can be doing to grow a podcast audience. Rob, I want to say thank you. We're a little over time, so I'm going to let you go.
It's all good.
You added a ton of value, and I am recommending to the listener, check out Contenders Wanted. By the time you check it out, it might have the tagline on the artwork. I'm not sure. It might. I do recommend that for you guys. Put your tagline on there. Make it so that at every step of the way, your listener knows who it's for and what they're going to get out of it. Don't leave any stone unturned. Make it in the title, the subtitle, the marketing, and especially that podcast artwork as well. Go check out Rob's website. It's down in the show notes. Check out his podcast. That link is also in the show notes. And if you do want to schedule a call with me for free, callwithadam.com. That's in the show notes. Rob, thank you for sharing everything that you shared, the ins and outs of what you're doing with your business and the big why behind it. I took a lot away from it myself. I'm going to let you go. Until next time, think outside the box. By the way, one way to ensure that you don't miss out on great content that we're producing on a regular basis is to make sure you're subscribed to the show. You need to be subscribed or following the Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to it in order not to miss all of that. And before I let you go, I need to mention, because a lot of people are asking, do you help? Can you help me with this? And the answer is yes. My company actually does it. It's called Grow Your Show. And you can find that at growyourshow.com. Our clients, they call us the easy button for podcaster because they simply have to record their episode. And they know that every single thing else is done for them. We sweat the hard stuff so you can be the star of your show. And if you would like help to make sure that we're editing and publishing and promoting and doing your social media, it's all in one place. And I think it's pretty affordable. You'll have to take a look for yourself. Just go to growyourshow.com and check us out. And by the way, I'll see you on the next episode.